In the small, tight-knit town of Silverbrook, a kind-hearted man named Samuel Roberts was known by everyone for his quiet strength and generosity. At 37, he had settled into a life that, while simple, was fulfilling. Working as a maintenance technician at the town's community center, Samuel found joy in repairing what others needed: a broken door, a leaky pipe, or even just lending a hand to anyone who asked. It wasn't a prestigious job, but it fit him perfectly, allowing him to do what he loved most: help others. Silverbrook was the kind of town where people took care of each other, a place where neighbors waved as they passed by and kept an eye out for one another's well-being. Samuel's modest, one-story house sat on the town's edge, surrounded by tall oak trees and filled with memories of his childhood. He had inherited the house from his parents, who had instilled in him the importance of kindness and hard work. Every morning, Samuel rose before dawn, brewing himself a cup of coffee and sitting on his porch as the sky lightened. It was a treasured moment of solitude before the day's bustle began. Once the sun was fully up, he'd drive into town, making his usual stop at Maggie's Diner, where Mrs. Carter, the waitress, always had his breakfast ready: scrambled eggs, toast, and a side of sausage. The two would exchange a few words about the latest news or the weather before he continued on to the community center. For Samuel, each day was filled with tasks that might seem ordinary to some, but to him, they brought a quiet satisfaction. Whether fixing a broken bench, setting up for community events, or simply being a friendly presence, he embraced each moment. His coworkers valued his skill, but more than that, they admired his warm heart and willingness to go the extra mile without expecting anything in return. One particular evening, after a long day, Samuel was on his way home, driving along a quiet country road just outside of Silverbrook. The sun had begun to set, casting the rolling hills and fields in a golden glow. He enjoyed these peaceful drives, appreciating the solitude and the chance to unwind before reaching home. As he rounded a bend, Samuel noticed a car pulled off to the side, its hazard lights blinking in the dimming light. Curious, he slowed down and saw a young woman standing beside the vehicle, visibly distressed. Without a second thought, he pulled over to see if he could help. "Hi there," he called out as he approached, offering a gentle smile. "Need a hand?" The woman, who introduced herself as Anna, looked relieved. She was in her late 20s, her blonde hair falling loosely around her face, her clothes slightly disheveled. She explained that she had a flat tire and didn't know how to change it, her voice tinged with frustration and anxiety. "No worries, I've changed plenty of these," Samuel said reassuringly. "I'll have you back on the road in no time." He rolled up his sleeves and got to work, setting the jack in place and removing the flat tire with ease. Anna stood by, grateful but visibly nervous, her eyes darting around the quiet road. After a few minutes, Samuel secured the spare tire and gave it a final check to make sure it was safe. "There you go," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth he kept in his truck. "Just be sure to get that tire fixed soon. The spare's good for short distances, but it won't last too long." Anna exhaled deeply, a wave of relief crossing her face. She reached into her purse and offered him a small wad of cash as a thank you. But Samuel shook his head, smiling kindly. "No need for that," he replied. "I was happy to help." She looked at him, a mix of gratitude and curiosity in her eyes, seemingly surprised that he'd refused the money. They exchanged a few more words, and with one last look of thanks, Anna got back into her car and drove off, glancing back at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. As Samuel climbed back into his own truck, he shrugged off any lingering thoughts about the encounter. Helping someone was just part of who he was. It didn't need to be anything more. He continued his drive home, the last traces of sunlight fading from the sky. The next morning, as Samuel enjoyed his usual coffee and watched the sunrise, he noticed an unfamiliar sight. A sleek black SUV parked just outside his house. It was unusual for the quiet neighborhood, and the vehicle's presence lingered in his mind throughout the morning. Little did he know, this seemingly simple act of kindness would spark a series of events that would alter the course of his life in ways he could never have anticipated. As Samuel Roberts drove down the quiet, winding road toward home, he noticed the golden light of dusk fading over the countryside. Rounding a bend, he saw a silver sedan parked on the shoulder, its hazard lights flashing in the dim light. Slowing down, he realized a woman stood beside it, looking distressed. Without hesitation, Samuel pulled over to see if she needed help. As he stepped out of his truck, the woman turned toward him, her expression a mix of relief and anxiety. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, dressed in a business-casual outfit, a blouse and pencil skirt, though a bit disheveled, as if she had been struggling with something. Samuel offered a kind smile as he approached. "Hi there," he greeted her. "Need some help?" "Yes, please," she replied, looking genuinely relieved. "I've got a flat tire and I have no idea how to change it. I've been trying, but—" She gestured to the scattered tools on the ground, her shoulders slumping slightly. Samuel chuckled softly, his smile warm. "No worries, I've changed more tires than I can count. I'll have you back on the road in no time." He walked over to the car, a sleek silver sedan, and quickly assessed the situation. The tire was completely flat, and from the look of it, she had driven on it for a while before realizing something was wrong. Samuel rolled up his sleeves, set the jack in place, and started lifting the car with practiced ease. As he worked, the woman stood nearby, watching him with a mix of gratitude and lingering tension. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said after a moment of silence. "I honestly didn't know what I was going to do." "It's no trouble at all," Samuel replied, glancing up with a reassuring smile. "Glad I could help." The woman shifted her weight, her eyes darting around the empty road, nervously. "I'm Emily, by the way, Halstead," she offered, as if trying to make small talk to ease her tension. "Nice to meet you, Emily," Samuel responded, focusing on loosening the lug nuts. "I'm Samuel." Emily gave a small, tight smile, still seeming a bit anxious. "I was just on my way home from work. It's been a long day, and I didn't even notice the tire going flat until it was too late." "It happens," Samuel said sympathetically. "The roads out here can be tough on tires, especially if you're not familiar with them." Emily gave a faint laugh. "Yeah, I'm still getting used to this area. I only moved here a couple of months ago. It's different from the city." Silverbrook was indeed a close-knit place, and Samuel was glad to see someone new moving in. "It's a nice town once you settle in," he told her as he removed the flat tire and began putting on the spare. "People here are friendly and always willing to help out." Emily nodded, though she remained quiet, her gaze continuing to sweep the empty road as if she was expecting someone. Samuel noticed her nervousness, but didn't pry. People had their reasons for being on edge, and it wasn't his place to ask. Within a few minutes, Samuel had secured the spare tire in place, lowering the car back down and tightening the lug nuts to make sure everything was set. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag he kept in his truck, and stepped back to admire his work. "There you go," he said with a smile. "You should be good to go now. Just make sure to get that tire repaired or replaced soon. The spare's only meant for short distances." Emily exhaled a long breath, clearly relieved. "Thank you, Samuel. I really don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." Samuel waved her gratitude off with a modest smile. "Happy to help, Emily. Drive safe and take care of that tire." Emily hesitated, then reached into her purse, pulling out a small wad of cash. "Please, take this. It's the least I can do." Samuel looked at the money, then shook his head gently. "No need. Helping someone in need is thanks enough for me." Emily blinked, clearly not expecting him to refuse. "Are you sure?" "It's really not much, but—" "Absolutely sure," he said with a warm smile. "Just pay it forward someday if you get the chance." After a long, thoughtful look, she tucked the money back into her purse and nodded. "Thank you, Samuel. Really. I won't forget this." With a final wave, Samuel climbed back into his truck, watching as Emily started her car and drove off. Her gratitude and the look she'd given him, a mix of relief and something else he couldn't quite place, lingered in his mind. As he continued his drive home, he shrugged off any further thoughts of the encounter. After all, helping people was simply a part of who he was. Little did he know, this simple act of kindness had just set off a chain of events that would soon change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her shoulders finally relaxing. "Thank you, Samuel. Really, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." Samuel gave her a gentle smile and shook his head. "It was no trouble at all, Emily. Just glad I was passing by when you needed a hand." With a grateful nod, Emily reached into her purse and pulled out a small bundle of cash. "Please, take this. It's the least I can do to thank you." Samuel looked at the money, then back at her, and politely shook his head. "I can't take that, really. Helping out someone in need is thanks enough for me." Emily paused, clearly surprised by his refusal. "Are you sure? It's not much, but I really do appreciate what you did." With a warm smile, Samuel replied, "I'm sure. Just drive safe and don't forget to get that tire fixed soon. That's all the thanks I need." Emily studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand what kind of person would turn down easy money. Finally, she slipped the cash back into her purse. "Thank you, Samuel. I won't forget this." "You're welcome, Emily," he said, giving her a nod. "Take care now." Samuel turned and walked back to his truck, watching as Emily got into her car and started the engine. She gave him one last look, a mix of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite pinpoint, before driving off into the dusk. As he climbed into his truck, Samuel reflected on the encounter. It wasn't unusual for him to lend a hand to someone. In fact, he did it often without a second thought. But there was something about Emily that seemed different. He couldn't quite place it, but her anxious glances at the empty road and the tense way she carried herself lingered in his mind. He shrugged off the feeling as he started his truck and headed home. People had their own lives, their own troubles, and it wasn't his place to dig into things that didn't concern him. He had done what he always did, helped someone in need, and that was enough. The sky grew darker as he drove the rest of the way, the last rays of sunlight fading beyond the horizon. Samuel felt a familiar sense of contentment settle over him, ready to relax in the comfort of his quiet home. But even as he looked forward to a calm evening, a small thought tugged at the back of his mind, a sense that this simple act of kindness might have set something unexpected into motion. He brushed the thought aside. Tomorrow was a new day, and whatever it held, he knew he would meet it with the same strength and kindness that had always guided him. As Samuel pulled into his driveway, he turned off the engine and took a deep breath, savoring the peace of the evening. Helping Emily had felt like just another good deed in a life filled with many. But little did he know, this particular act of kindness would change his life in ways he could never have anticipated. Unaware of the chain of events that had just begun, Samuel stepped out of his truck and walked into his house, closing the door behind him. Samuel started his day as he did every morning, with a fresh cup of coffee. As it brewed, he leaned against the counter and glanced out the window over the sink, taking in the quiet calm of his street. It was early, with only a few neighbors out for their morning walks. His gaze drifted to the curb outside his house, where a sleek black SUV sat parked, a bit out of place for Silverbrook, where most people drove older, practical cars. Samuel frowned slightly but brushed it off, assuming the car belonged to someone visiting a neighbor. Once his coffee was ready, he sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the morning newspaper. But every so often, he found himself looking back at the SUV, still parked in the same spot. The minutes ticked by, and the car didn't move. There was no sign of anyone inside, and its tinted windows gave no clues. Curiosity began to tug at him, an unusual feeling since Samuel normally paid little attention to other people's business. But the longer the SUV sat there, silent and unmoving, the more it unsettled him. Finally, he shook his head, dismissing the thought as paranoia. It was probably nothing. After breakfast, he got ready for work, grabbing his keys and locking up the house. As he stepped out onto his porch, he glanced over at the SUV again. Its windows were dark, making it impossible to see inside, and there was no movement, no engine running. It was as if the vehicle were abandoned, but somehow, Samuel doubted that. He took a deep breath, deciding to let it go. He had a full day ahead at the community center, and he didn't need distractions. As he climbed into his truck and started the engine, he cast one last glance at the SUV, which remained parked as still and silent as it had been all morning. Arriving at the community center a few minutes later, Samuel was greeted by the comforting sights and sounds of the place he loved. Staff bustled around, preparing for the day's activities. As he walked through the doors, he was met with warm smiles and nods from his coworkers, who appreciated his steady presence and helping hand. "Morning, Samuel," called Denise, the receptionist, from her desk. "Morning, Denise," he replied with a smile. "Everything running smoothly today?" "As smooth as it can be," Denise chuckled. "You know how it is." Samuel nodded, heading to the maintenance room where he kept his tools and supplies. Today, he had a few tasks lined up: a leaky faucet in one of the bathrooms, a door off its hinges, and setting up for an event in the main hall. It was routine work, but Samuel welcomed it. Yet, as the morning went on, he found himself distracted. His thoughts kept drifting back to that mysterious black SUV parked outside his house. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was unusual for any car to stay parked in the same spot for that long, especially in a town like Silverbrook where strangers were rare. With a shake of his head, he tried to push the thoughts away, reminding himself to focus on the work at hand. But even as he tightened bolts, tested pipes, and adjusted chairs, a lingering unease remained. He told himself he was overthinking it. The SUV was probably just a coincidence, a random car with no connection to him. But the sense of something off continued to nag at him, quietly persistent in the back of his mind. By lunchtime, Samuel couldn't shake his uneasy feeling about the black SUV outside his house. The vehicle had been parked there all morning without a hint of movement, and the more he thought about it, the more unsettling it seemed. Hoping to clear his mind, Samuel decided to take a break from the community center and head to the local grocery store for a sandwich and some fresh air. He enjoyed the short walk through Silverbrook, greeting familiar faces and taking in the sights of the town he knew so well. But as he approached the store, he stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. The black SUV was parked across the street, unmistakable with its dark-tinted windows and sleek, polished exterior. It couldn't be a coincidence. Samuel stared at the SUV, trying to decide what to do. His first instinct was to confront whoever was inside, but he wasn't sure if that was the right approach. What if he was overreacting, or it was just an odd coincidence? But deep down, he felt certain that someone was following him. Taking a steadying breath, Samuel entered the grocery store, his mind racing. He grabbed a sandwich from the deli and paid at the counter, but his thoughts kept circling back to the SUV. As he left the store, he couldn't resist glancing across the street again. The SUV was still there, an ominous shadow over what should have been an ordinary day. Instead of heading straight back to the community center, Samuel decided to test a theory. He walked in the opposite direction, taking a meandering route through town. He passed by the park, the library, and a few other local spots, each time glancing back to see if the SUV would follow. Sure enough, every time he checked, the vehicle was there, never too far behind, but always keeping its distance. By the time Samuel returned to the community center, his unease had intensified into a gnawing anxiety. He tried to focus on his tasks for the afternoon, but the thought of the SUV lurking nearby made it nearly impossible. He kept glancing out the windows, half expecting to see the vehicle parked nearby, watching him. The rest of the day passed in a blur, his mind never fully able to focus. When evening finally came, Samuel left the community center with a heavy sense of dread. He scanned the street for any sign of the SUV, but it wasn't there. It didn't necessarily mean it was gone. It could still be close by, waiting for him to lower his guard. As he drove home, Samuel kept checking his rearview mirror, expecting to catch a glimpse of the familiar black vehicle following him. But the drive was quiet, uneventful. By the time he pulled into his driveway, there was no sign of the SUV, and he allowed himself a small sense of relief, thinking maybe it was finally over. But as he stepped out of his truck and walked toward his front door, something caught his eye. The black SUV was back, parked at the end of his street. It was just far enough away to be out of sight unless someone was actively looking for it. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the vehicle, wondering who was behind this and why they had singled him out. Samuel stood on his front porch, staring at the black SUV parked down the street, trying to make sense of what was happening. He debated his next move. Should he go over and confront whoever was inside, or should he call the local police and report the suspicious activity? Neither option felt quite right. The officers in Silverbrook were trustworthy, but he wasn't sure they'd take his concerns seriously. Confronting someone who was clearly trying to stay hidden might be dangerous. In the end, Samuel decided to go inside and wait. He locked the door behind him, then walked over to the front window and peered out, watching the unmoving SUV. Its presence felt like a dark cloud hanging over his home, and he knew he couldn't ignore it forever. Something was definitely wrong. The night dragged on slowly. Samuel lay in bed, unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured the SUV outside, its darkened windows concealing whoever was inside. Several times he got up to check the window, hoping to see that it was finally gone. But each time, the vehicle remained exactly where it had been, silently watching. By the time dawn broke, Samuel felt exhausted and unrested, having finally drifted off only in the early hours of the morning. He got up groggily, made himself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table, glancing out the window. To his relief, the SUV was gone. But deep down, he knew it would be back. As he sipped his coffee, Samuel tried to figure out what to do next. He couldn't go on living like this, constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for something to happen. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront whoever was in that SUV. Later that day, after finishing his work at the community center, Samuel decided it was time to take action. Leaving work early, he drove home, keeping a watchful eye out for the vehicle. He felt tense, anticipating its reappearance. And sure enough, as he turned onto his street, there it was, the black SUV, parked at the end of the block. His heart raced as he pulled into his driveway, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He wasn't entirely sure what he was going to say or do, but he knew he couldn't keep avoiding this confrontation. Stepping out of his truck, Samuel took a deep breath and began walking toward the SUV, his footsteps heavy with determination. His heart pounded as he closed the distance, his nerves alive with anticipation. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready to face it. When he was just a few feet away, the driver's side window of the SUV rolled down slightly. Samuel could see a shadowy figure behind the tinted glass, but couldn't make out any details. He opened his mouth, about to speak, but before he could get a single word out, the SUV's engine roared to life. The vehicle sped off down the street, tires screeching as it turned the corner, and disappeared from sight. Samuel stood there, stunned, his heart still racing. The confrontation he had braced himself for had ended before it even began, leaving him with more questions than answers. Whoever was in that SUV had put effort into staying hidden, and they weren't going to make it easy for him to uncover the truth. As he walked back to his house, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whoever had been in that SUV had gone to great lengths to follow him, and something told him they weren't finished yet. Samuel sensed he was in over his head. Whoever was following him wasn't going to stop. The mystery surrounding the black SUV was only beginning, and he knew that his quiet life was about to be upended in ways he couldn't yet imagine. He spent a restless night, his mind racing with thoughts of the dark SUV and the shadowy figure who had sped away before he could confront them. Try as he might, he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was on the horizon, something that would disrupt the peace he had carefully built. As the morning sun filtered through his blinds, Samuel let out a resigned sigh. Ready or not, today might finally bring answers. After his usual routine of coffee and breakfast, he decided to take a walk to clear his mind. The crisp morning air did little to soothe his nerves, but the familiar sounds of his neighborhood were a small comfort. Children played in nearby yards, and neighbors greeted him with waves and smiles. For a brief moment, it almost felt like an ordinary day. But that sense of normalcy shattered when he returned to his street and saw the black SUV parked outside his house once again, in the same spot as before. His heart sank, but this time, dread was replaced with a sense of determination. He needed answers. He was done waiting. As he stood on his front porch, staring at the SUV, he noticed something new. Two men in sharp suits stepped out of the vehicle, moving with an air of authority. Their expressions were calm, composed, as they approached him. "Good morning, Mr. Samuel," the older man greeted him as they reached the porch. He was tall, with neatly slicked-back gray hair and a polished tone that immediately set Samuel on edge. The other man, slightly younger with a steely gaze, stood silently by his side. Samuel replied cautiously. Morning. He crossed his arms trying to appear calm, though his mind was racing with questions. The older man offered a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lowell James, and this is my associate, Mr. Grant. We represent the Halstead family. Samuel's brow furrowed in confusion. The name meant nothing to him. The Halstead family? He asked, uncertain. Yes, Lowell continued smoothly. I believe you had a brief encounter with one of their family members recently, Miss Emily Halstead. Samuel's eyes widened as he recalled the young woman he had helped on the roadside. The flat tire, her nervous demeanor, the late hour, it all came flooding back. Emily Halstead? He repeated, almost to himself. Lowell nodded, as if sensing Samuel's shock. Indeed, Emily is the daughter of Mr. Richard Halstead, a name you might recognize. He's a prominent businessman, a billionaire, actually. Samuel's mind spun as he tried to process the information. He had no idea that the woman he'd helped was connected to such a powerful family. I didn't know, he managed, still struggling to wrap his head around the idea. No, of course you didn't, Lowell replied smoothly, as though Samuel's ignorance of the situation was entirely understandable. Lowell waved a hand dismissively. Miss Halstead didn't reveal her identity to you, and understandably so. It was a stressful situation, and she was likely focused on just getting home safely. Samuel nodded, unsure of how to respond. The whole situation felt surreal. He had only done what felt right, helping a stranger in need. Now here he was, standing on his porch with two representatives of a powerful family. Finally, Samuel spoke, his tone wary. So what do you want from me? Lowell smiled again, this time with a hint of something more, maybe amusement. We're not here to ask anything of you, Mr. Samuel. Quite the opposite, actually. We're here to offer you something. Offer me something? Samuel repeated, his suspicion deepening. This didn't feel right. What could you possibly offer me? It was then that Grant, the younger man, spoke up. His tone was firm and direct. We're here to reward you, Mr. Samuel, for your kindness, your selflessness. The Halstead family doesn't take such acts lightly. Samuel frowned, his mind racing. Reward me? For what? I just helped her change a tire. Anyone would have done the same. That may be true, Lowell replied, stepping closer. But you stopped. You helped her and asked for nothing in return. That means something to the Halstead family. Samuel shook his head, still not understanding. I don't need a reward. I was just doing what I thought was right. And that, Lowell said earnestly, is precisely why they want to reward you. Your actions, your character, they stand out in a world where so many would have simply driven by. The Halstead family appreciates that. Samuel looked from Lowell to Grant, studying their faces, trying to read their expressions. There was something unsettling about the way they carried themselves, too polished, too practiced. Trust didn't come easily to Samuel, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than they were letting on. What kind of reward are we talking about? He asked cautiously. He didn't want to get involved in something he didn't understand, especially with people who had this kind of wealth and influence. Lowell exchanged a glance with Grant before responding. That, Mr. Samuel, is entirely up to you. The Halsteads have the means to change your life in ways you can't even imagine. They could offer you financial support, a new home, a better job, whatever you might desire. Samuel's eyes narrowed. And what's the catch? No catch, Lowell assured him, though the way he said it only made Samuel more suspicious. This is simply a gesture of goodwill, their way of saying thank you. Samuel didn't believe that for a second. Nothing's ever free, he said, shaking his head, especially not from people like the Halsteads. Lowell's smile faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly regained his composure. I understand your hesitation, Mr. Samuel, but I assure you, there are no strings attached. You did something good, and the Halstead family wants to repay that kindness. Samuel stood in silence, trying to make sense of it all. The offer was tempting. Who wouldn't want an easier, better life? But something deep within him warned that accepting would mean stepping into a world he wasn't sure he wanted to enter. A voice deep inside Samuel warned him that accepting anything from these men would come with a price, one he might not be willing to pay. I appreciate the offer, Samuel finally said, his tone steady. But I'm not interested. Lowell and Grant exchanged a look, this one less controlled than before. Grant seemed ready to argue, but Lowell raised a hand, stopping him. "Mr. Robbers," Lowell began, his voice still calm but with an edge of insistence, "perhaps you should take some time to think it over. This isn't an opportunity that comes along every day." Samuel shook his head firmly. "I don't need time to consider. I have a good life, and I'm happy with what I have. I don't need anything from the Halsteads." Grant's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, Samuel thought the younger man might press the issue. But Lowell quickly took control of the situation, his smile returning, though it had a colder edge now. "Of course, Mr. Robbers, we respect your decision." Samuel nodded, feeling a sense of relief that they weren't going to push further. "Thank you for understanding." Lowell reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small card and handing it to Samuel. "If you change your mind, or if there's ever anything you need, don't hesitate to reach out. The Halsteads are always willing to help those who show kindness." Samuel took the card, glancing at its simple, elegant design. It bore nothing but a phone number, printed in understated type, with no other identifying information. He slipped it into his pocket, more out of politeness than anything else. "Thank you," he replied, though he had no intention of ever using it. Lowell and Grant nodded in unison, their professional demeanor returning. "We'll take our leave now, Mr. Robbers," Lowell said, turning to walk back to the SUV. "We wish you all the best." Grant followed, his expression unreadable as he glanced back at Samuel one last time before getting into the vehicle. Samuel watched them drive away, his mind reeling from the strange encounter. The SUV disappeared down the street, leaving him standing on his porch, the card still in his hand. As the SUV vanished from view, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The Halstead family was powerful, and they didn't seem like the type to simply take no for an answer. He had a strong suspicion that they would contact him again, and he wasn't sure how he'd handle it when they did. He went back inside, still holding the card, staring at it thoughtfully. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to remove any trace of the strange experience from his life. But another part, the part that was both curious and a little afraid, urged him to keep it, just in case. After a long pause, Samuel finally tucked the card into a drawer in the kitchen, out of sight but not entirely out of mind. He tried to go about his day as usual, but the encounter with Lowell and Grant lingered in his thoughts. Their vague promises, the way they'd spoken of life-altering rewards, it all felt too good to be true. And yet, a small part of Samuel couldn't help but wonder what his life might be like if he had accepted. As he went about his routine, he tried to push the thoughts aside, but the sense of mystery and unease refused to fade. Samuel couldn't help but wonder what life might have been like if he had accepted the Halsteads' offer. What would it feel like to have money, influence, and power, to live without worrying about bills, work, or any of the burdens he'd carried for so long? But deep down, Samuel knew himself too well to believe that these things would make him truly happy. He had always been content with his simple life, and he wasn't willing to trade that, not even for the promise of something grander. As the day went on, he tried to push the encounter from his mind, focusing instead on the things that mattered. He spent time with his friends, worked on small projects around the house, and even went for an evening jog to clear his head. But no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Halsteads weren't done with him yet. They'd be back, and he'd need to be ready. That night, as Samuel lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the conversation with Lowell and Grant, their promises and polished words swirling in his thoughts. It all felt like a strange, unreal intrusion into his ordinary life. Yet, staring up at the ceiling, he knew that this was now his reality. The Halsteads were real, and they had taken a peculiar interest in him. He just didn't know why or what they truly wanted from him. And it was this uncertainty, this fear of the unknown, that kept him awake well into the night. Lying there, Samuel reflected on the events of the past few days. The visit from Lowell and Grant had unsettled him deeply, and despite his refusal, the weight of their offer lingered in his thoughts, tugging at him with unspoken possibilities. It felt strange, foreign even, to imagine receiving something so significant for a small act of kindness. His life had always been guided by principles: humility, integrity, and a commitment to doing the right thing without expecting anything in return. And yet, the allure of the power and wealth the Halstead family offered was hard to ignore. As the hours passed, Samuel found himself thinking about his life with new intensity. He thought about the years he'd spent working hard, making ends meet, and finding contentment in life's small pleasures. He wasn't a man who craved luxury or recognition. He found fulfillment in his relationships, his community, and the simple joys of living an honest life. But now, his life felt like it was at a crossroads. The choice he'd made on the roadside that night, to stop and help Emily Halstead, had set off a chain of events he could never have foreseen. And now, the decision he faced felt heavier than anything he'd ever encountered. Finally, unable to sleep, Samuel rose from his bed. Samuel paced to the small living room and sat down on his worn couch, running a hand through his hair as he mulled over his next steps. He knew he couldn't make this decision alone. He needed the advice of the people he trusted most. The next morning, Samuel reached out to a few close friends and family members, asking them to come over. He didn't reveal much over the phone, only that he needed their guidance on something important. By early afternoon, they had gathered in his living room, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. Among them were his childhood friend, David, who'd been like a brother to him since they were young, his sister Lisa, known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude, and his Aunt Rose, a wise woman who had seen more of life's ups and downs than most. They all sat around Samuel's small coffee table, looking at him expectantly. "So, what's this all about?" David asked, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "You sounded pretty serious on the phone." Samuel took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Something happened a few days ago," he began, then recounted the night he'd helped Emily Halstead and the surprising visit from the two men representing her family. As he spoke, he observed his friends' and family's reactions. David's brow furrowing in thought, Lisa's eyes narrowing with suspicion, and Aunt Rose nodding slowly, as if she had already sensed where this was headed. When Samuel finished, a heavy silence settled over the room. Finally, Lisa broke it, her tone direct. "So let me get this straight. These men came to your house offering you a reward just because you helped some wealthy woman on the side of the road?" Samuel nodded. "That's right. But it wasn't just any reward. They made it sound like they could completely change my life. Money, a new house, whatever I wanted." David let out a low whistle. "Man, that's something. And you turned them down?" "Yeah," Samuel replied, though he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. "I told them I didn't want anything from them. But I don't know, something about the whole thing doesn't feel right." Lisa leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Of course it doesn't. People like that don't just hand out life-changing offers for nothing, especially people with that kind of wealth and power. There's always a catch." "I agree," Aunt Rose chimed in, her voice calm but firm. "In my experience, when someone offers you the world, they usually expect something in return. And it's often more than you'd be willing to give." David nodded thoughtfully. "Still, it's not every day you get an offer like that. I mean, they could really change your life, Sam. You wouldn't have to worry about money or any of that ever again." "And what would he have to give up in return?" Lisa countered, her voice sharp. "His independence? His peace of mind?" "We don't know these people, David. We don't know what they're really after." Samuel sighed, rubbing his temples as the conflicting opinions swirled around him. He had hoped that talking it through would bring him some clarity, but instead it seemed to make things even more complicated. Samuel took a deep breath, sensing that talking with his friends had made things more complicated, not clearer. "Look," he said finally, "I didn't bring you all here to argue. I just wanted your perspectives. On one hand, I know I could use the help they're offering, but on the other, I'm worried about what it might cost me in the long run." Aunt Rose reached over and placed a comforting hand on Samuel's arm. "You're a good man, Samuel. You've always done what's right, and that's why you're struggling with this. Remember, it's not just about what you might gain, it's about what you might lose too." Her words hit home, and Samuel nodded, appreciating her wisdom. But before he could respond, a sudden knock at the door startled them all. The room fell silent as they exchanged puzzled glances. Samuel stood up, his heart racing as he moved toward the door. He hadn't been expecting anyone else, and after all that had happened, a sense of unease crept over him. When he opened the door, his breath caught. Standing on his porch was Emily Halstead, the very woman he had helped that night on the roadside. She looked different, more composed, though a weariness lingered in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Emily?" Samuel said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Samuel," she replied, her voice soft but urgent. "I'm sorry to show up like this, but I need to talk to you. Can I come in?" Samuel hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, allowing her to enter. As she walked into the living room, the others looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Emily glanced around, clearly aware of the tension in the room. "Hello," she said, nodding politely. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really need to speak with Samuel." "It's fine," Samuel replied, guiding her to a seat. "We were just talking about, well, everything that's happened." Emily nodded and took a deep breath as she sat down. "I figured as much. That's actually why I'm here. There's something I need to tell you, Samuel, something I didn't mention before." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He had sensed there was more to this story, but he hadn't expected Emily to come to him directly. "What is it?" Emily looked around the room, her gaze lingering on each person before finally focusing back on Samuel. "The night you helped me, it wasn't just a flat tire I was dealing with," she said, her voice tinged with hesitation. I was running away." David's voice broke the silence, filled with surprise. "Running away? From what?" Emily's expression tightened as she looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "From my family, or more specifically, from the people my family is involved with. My father, he's a powerful man. But he's made dangerous enemies over the years, people who wouldn't hesitate to use me to get to him." A chill ran down Samuel's spine as he listened to her words. This was more than he had ever imagined, far more than a simple act of kindness gone awry. "The night you found me," Emily continued, "I had just escaped from a situation that—" Emily took a deep breath, her gaze steady but vulnerable. "The night you found me, I had just escaped from a situation where I was being held by people who were trying to use me to leverage my father's influence. They're dangerous, and I knew I had to get away. That's why I was so desperate, so scared." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed her words. Samuel could hardly believe it. This woman he had helped was entangled in a web of power and intrigue he could barely comprehend. "I didn't tell you any of this before because, well, I didn't want to pull you into my problems," Emily admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But now I realize you're already involved, whether you wanted to be or not. That's why I'm here, to warn you." Samuel's mind spun as he tried to process her revelation. "Warn me? About what?" Emily looked at him, her expression filled with concern. "About my family," she said, meeting his eyes. "They're not bad people, but they're powerful, and they'll do anything to protect me. That's why they sent those men to you, to try and repay you for what you did. But, Samuel, you have to understand, accepting their offer might come with consequences. You could be drawn into something far more dangerous than you realize." Samuel felt his throat tighten as he considered her words. He had sensed there was more to the Halsteads' offer, but hearing it from Emily made it all feel much more real and far more daunting. "What should I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily hesitated, then reached out and placed her hand gently on his. "I can't tell you what to do, Samuel, but whatever choice you make, do it for yourself, not for them. Don't let them control your life, no matter how tempting their offer might seem." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Samuel had always prided himself on living life on his own terms, without relying on anyone else. The thought of losing that independence, of being caught up in the Halsteads' powerful world, filled him with unease. Emily continued, her voice thick with emotion. "And Samuel, thank you. What you did for me that night meant more than you'll ever know. You didn't just save me from a flat tire, you saved me from something much darker. For that, I'll always be grateful." Samuel looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity and gratitude there. In that moment, he realized this wasn't about the reward or the Halstead family's offer. It was about the impact his kindness had had on someone's life. He saw how a single small gesture could ripple out, changing things in ways he never could have anticipated. They sat in silence, the weight of the choice ahead pressing down on Samuel. He knew that whatever decision he made, It would change the course of his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But one thing was clear. He couldn't make this choice lightly. It would require careful thought, deep reflection, and above all, staying true to the values he had lived by. As the evening drew to a close and his friends and family began to leave, Samuel walked Emily to the door, her presence reminding him of the complexity of the path before him. "Take care, Samuel," Emily said softly as she stepped out. "You too, Emily," he replied, watching as she disappeared into the night, his mind heavy with the weight of the decisions to come. As Emily stepped outside, she paused and looked back. "Remember, you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, you have people who care about you." Samuel nodded, watching as she walked down the steps and disappeared into the night. Her words lingered in his mind, a reminder of the support around him, even in the face of such a weighty decision. As he locked the door behind him, Samuel knew that the time had come to decide, a choice that would define his future. Would he keep the quiet, independent life he had always known, or step into a world filled with power, influence, and unforeseen dangers? Sitting back down on his worn couch, Samuel took a deep breath, his thoughts swirling as he considered the possibilities. Whichever path he chose, one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. The next morning, Samuel sat at his kitchen table as dawn's light streamed through the window. The decision weighed heavily on him. He'd spent the entire night reflecting on everything: the black SUV, the men in suits, Emily's warning, and the offer that had been laid before him. The promise of wealth and resources could change his life, but he knew it came with strengths. He had always cherished his independence, living life on his terms, and the idea of getting entangled in the Halstead family's world of wealth and power made him uneasy. Yet he couldn't ignore the potential good that could come from accepting their offer. With the resources they were offering, he could make a real difference in his community. The idea of providing opportunities, creating a safe place for young people, and supporting those in need deeply appealed to him. It was a chance to give back in ways he had never been able to before. After hours of reflection, Samuel made his decision. He would accept the offer, but only on his terms. He wouldn't be a pawn in the Halstead family's game. If they wanted to reward him, it would be for the benefit of his community, not for their own gain. Later that day, Samuel dialed the number the men had left him. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke to the representative on the other end. "I've made my decision," he said. "I'm willing to accept the reward, but there are conditions." The man on the line seemed surprised but interested. "We're listening," he replied. Samuel took a steadying breath and outlined his terms. He wanted the resources to go toward building a community center in his neighborhood, a place where kids could come after school, adults could access job training and educational programs, and families could find support when they needed it. He also wanted to set up a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, giving them the chance to pursue higher education. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Samuel could hear the man discussing his proposal with someone else in the room. Finally, the representative spoke again. "Mr. Samuel, we appreciate your proposal. We'll need to discuss this further with the family, but I believe we can come to an agreement." Samuel felt a sense of relief. For the first time in days, he felt a hint of control over his life again. He had set the terms, and now it was up to the Halsteads to accept or walk away. Samuel felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had taken control of the situation, turning what might have been a burden into an opportunity to help others. The representative assured him they'd be in touch soon with the final details, and within a few weeks, the Halstead family agreed to Samuel's terms. Plans quickly took shape to build the community center and establish the scholarship fund. Samuel found himself at the center of it all, working closely with architects, community leaders, and educators to ensure that these projects would truly benefit those in need. As the days passed, Samuel noticed a shift in his life. The black SUV, once a symbol of uncertainty and fear, now seemed more like a reassuring presence. Instead of mystery, it represented the support and resources he now had at his disposal. Samuel had gone from a quiet, humble man with simple routines to someone with the power to create meaningful change. Despite this newfound influence, Samuel stayed grounded. He continued his daily routines, chatting with neighbors, helping at the local church, and lending a hand to anyone who needed it. But now, he could do so on a much larger scale. The community center became a beacon of hope in the neighborhood, a place where people from all backgrounds could come together and support each other. The scholarship fund opened doors for young people, offering them opportunities for a brighter future that many had never thought possible. One day, as Samuel walked past the newly constructed community center, he saw a group of children playing basketball on the court. Their laughter filled the air, and Samuel couldn't help but smile, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what it was all about, using the resources he'd been given to lift others up and build a better future. Over time, Samuel's story spread throughout the town, and people marveled at how a simple act of kindness had led to such profound change, not only in Samuel's life, but in the lives of countless others. The ripple effect of that one moment, stopping to help a stranded woman on the side of the road, reached far and wide. Through it all, Samuel remained humble, never forgetting where he came from or the values that had guided him. He continued to help others as he always had, only now with the resources and connections he had gained. He became a mentor to the young people in the community, offering guidance and support as they navigated their own paths in life. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Samuel sat on the porch of his modest home, reflecting on all that had happened. The black SUV was parked across the street, just as it had been for weeks, but now it no longer felt out of place. Instead, it served as a reminder of the journey he'd been on, the choices he had made, and the impact he had been able to create in the world around him. Emily stayed in touch, visiting the community center often, and lending her support to the projects Samuel had initiated. Inspired by Samuel's kindness, she too found a sense of purpose in giving back to others. The kindness Samuel had shown Emily that night on the roadside had sparked a lasting friendship built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to make a difference. As Samuel looked out over the town, he knew his life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. Yet at his core, he was still the same humble man, driven by a desire to help others. The influence and resources he'd gained were simply tools to be used in the service of something greater than himself. In the end, it wasn't the reward that had made the biggest impact. It was that small act of kindness that had set everything in motion. Samuel understood now that every action, no matter how small, held the potential to make a difference in the world. And that realization was the greatest reward of all. As he stood up and walked back into his house, Samuel felt a deep sense of peace. He had made the right decision, and his life now held a meaning that went beyond his own desires. It was about the community, the future, and the endless possibilities for growth and change. As he closed the door behind him, he knew that whatever lay ahead, he was ready for it. The road was uncertain, but with the lessons he had learned and the lives he had touched, Samuel was confident that he could face anything with the same kindness and determination that had brought him this far. In the months that followed, the impact of Samuel's decision rippled through Oak Ridge like waves on a pond. The community center he had envisioned quickly grew into a vibrant hub of activity, its doors open to everyone seeking education, support, or simply a place to belong. The scholarship fund had already changed the lives of several promising students, giving them opportunities they had once only dreamed of. But perhaps the most profound transformation had occurred within Samuel himself. One crisp autumn morning, Samuel stood outside the community center, watching a group of volunteers planting trees along the newly paved walkway. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and friendly conversation, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost somber atmosphere that had once characterized this part of town. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" a familiar voice said from behind him. Samuel turned to see Emily standing there, a warm smile on her face. She had become a regular visitor to Oak Ridge, her initial wariness replaced by genuine enthusiasm for the changes unfolding in the town. "It really is," Samuel replied, his voice filled with a mix of pride and humility. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed." Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the bustling scene before them. "You've done amazing things here, Samuel. You've given people hope." Samuel shook his head slightly, a habit he'd developed whenever anyone tried to give him too much credit. "We've all done this together," he said modestly. "I just helped point us in the right direction." As they stood side by side, watching the community come together, Samuel couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led him here. The decision to accept the Halstead family's offer, but to use it in a way that stayed true to his own values. Accepting the Halstead's terms had been a major turning point for Samuel. It opened doors he had never imagined, but it also brought challenges he hadn't foreseen. One of those challenges appeared at that moment as James Lowell, the man who had first approached him on the Halstead family's behalf, walked up to him and Emily. His polished appearance remained unchanged, but there was a newfound respect in his eyes as he extended his hand to Samuel. "Mr. Samuel," Lowell greeted, his voice smooth and professional. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Samuel shook his hand, noting Lowell's firm grip. "Not at all, Mr. Lowell. Emily and I were just admiring the progress." Lowell nodded, his gaze sweeping over the community center and the bustling activity around it. "It's truly impressive what you've accomplished here. The family is very pleased." There was a weight to Lowell's words that Samuel had come to recognize. The Halstead family's approval was not easily earned, and it often came with unspoken expectations. "I'm glad to hear that," Samuel replied carefully. "But I hope they understand that this has never been about impressing anyone. It's about doing what's best for the community." Lowell's expression remained neutral, though there was a flicker of what might have been admiration in his eyes. "Of course, and that's precisely why the family is interested in expanding the scope of your work." Samuel felt a familiar tension settle in his shoulders. He had known this moment would come. The Halsteads weren't content with funding a single community center and scholarship program. They saw something in Samuel, potential they wanted to harness. "Expanding?" Samuel asked, his tone steady. "In what way?" Lowell reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek folder. "We've drawn up some proposals. The family believes your model could be replicated in communities across the state, perhaps even nationally." Samuel took the folder, feeling its weight in his hands. It was more than just paper and ink. It represented another crossroads, a choice that could alter his life once again. "I'll look it over," Samuel said, tucking the folder under his arm. "But I can't make any promises. My focus is here, on Oak Ridge." Lowell nodded, appearing satisfied with the response. "Of course. Take your time. We're in no rush." With that, he excused himself, leaving Samuel and Emily alone once more. Emily watched as Lowell walked away, a slight frown on her face. "They're not going to let this go, you know," she said softly. "Once the Halsteads see potential in something or someone, they pursue it relentlessly." Samuel sighed, feeling the weight of the folder under his arm. "I know, but I can't lose sight of why I started this. It was never about building an empire or becoming a public figure." Emily placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "I know that, Samuel. And that's why you're the right person for this. You won't let the power go to your head." As they stood there, surrounded by the lively hum of community activity, Samuel felt a surge of determination. He had navigated the complexities of the Halstead family's world thus far, and he was ready to keep doing so. On his terms. Samuel had managed to navigate the complexities of the Halstead family's world so far, and he knew he could keep going as long as he stayed true to his principles. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. He threw himself into his work, helping volunteers, discussing plans for new programs with the center's staff, and meeting with local business owners eager to support the community. By the time evening arrived, he was exhausted but fulfilled. As he walked home, the black SUV, which once filled him with unease, now followed him at a discreet distance. He had come to accept its presence as a part of his life, a reminder of the influence he now held and the responsibilities that came with it. Once home, Samuel settled into his favorite chair, the sleek folder Lowell had given him resting on the coffee table. He stared at it for a long moment, torn between curiosity and apprehension. Finally, with a deep breath, he opened it. Inside were ambitious proposals. The Halstead family envisioned a network of community centers across the state, each modeled after the success of the one in Oak Ridge. They wanted Samuel to oversee the entire operation, becoming the face of a movement that could transform thousands of lives. As he read through the documents, Samuel felt both excitement and trepidation. The potential for good was enormous, but so was the risk of losing his way. He had seen how easily power could corrupt and how even the best intentions could be twisted by greed or ego. Samuel stayed up late into the night, poring over the proposals, making notes, and wrestling with the weight of the decision before him. When he finally went to bed, his mind was still whirling with possibilities and concerns. The next morning, Samuel woke up early, still without a clear decision. He went through his usual routine: a cup of coffee, a quick breakfast, and a walk around the neighborhood. As he passed houses where he knew families struggled and children faced uncertain futures, he felt the weight of the impact he could have pressing down on him. When he arrived at the community center, he was surprised to see Aunt Rose waiting for him, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile as he approached. "Aunt Rose," Samuel greeted, giving her a big hug. "What brings you here so early?" She patted his cheek affectionately. "Oh, I had a feeling you might need some of my famous advice this morning." Samuel chuckled. Aunt Rose had an uncanny ability to sense when he was facing a crossroads. "You're right," he admitted. "How about we grab a coffee and talk?" They settled into a quiet corner of the center's cafe, steaming mugs of coffee between them. Samuel shared the Halstead family's proposal, along with his hopes and concerns. Aunt Rose listened intently, her eyes sharp and focused. When he finished, she was silent for a moment, carefully choosing her words. "You know, Samuel," she began, her voice gentle yet firm, "when I was young, I faced a choice not so different from yours. It wasn't about wealth or power, but it was about the direction my life would take. I could stay in our small town, marry the boy everyone expected me to." Aunt Rose leaned back with a wistful smile as she continued, "I had the choice to settle down, marry, and follow the life that was laid out for me, or I could leave and pursue my dreams, embracing the unknown." Samuel leaned forward, intrigued. Aunt Rose rarely talked about her youth. "So what did you do?" he asked. "I left," she said softly. "I traveled, studied, experienced things I never could have imagined. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. But I never regretted it, because I knew I was being true to myself." She reached across the table, placing her hand over Samuel's. "The question you need to ask yourself, Samuel, isn't whether you should take this opportunity. It's whether you can stay true to yourself and your values if you do." Samuel nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "But how can I be sure? How do I know I won't lose my way?" Aunt Rose's eyes sparkled with wisdom. "You can't be sure, dear. That's life's nature. But I know you, Samuel. I've watched you grow from a boy into the man you are today. You have a strong moral compass, and as long as you keep listening to it, you'll find your way." As they finished their coffee, Samuel felt a sense of clarity settling over him. Aunt Rose's words struck a chord, grounding him in the values that had guided him all along. "Thank you, Aunt Rose," he said as they stood to leave. "I think I know what I need to do now." She patted his arm with a gentle smile. "You always did, Samuel. Sometimes you just need a little reminder." With renewed purpose, Samuel spent the next few days carefully considering the Halstead family's proposal. He spoke with community leaders, sought advice from mentors, and spent long hours in reflection. Finally, he felt ready to make his decision. He arranged a meeting with James Lowell and chose to hold it at the community center rather than in a corporate office. When Lowell arrived, looking slightly out of place in his expensive suit, Samuel felt a sense of calm confidence. "Mr. Lowell," Samuel began, once they were seated in his modest office, "I've given your proposal a lot of thought." Lowell leaned forward, his expression eager, as Samuel took a deep breath. "I'm interested in moving forward, but I have conditions." Samuel outlined his vision, a network of community centers that would stay true to the grassroots, community-driven model they'd established in Oak Ridge. Each center would be tailored to the needs of its specific community, with local leaders playing a crucial role in decision-making. Samuel would oversee the network, but he insisted on keeping his home base in Oak Ridge. "I won't become some distant figurehead," Samuel explained firmly. "I need to stay connected to the people we're trying to help. And I want safeguards in place to ensure the focus remains on community service, not building a corporate empire." Lowell listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Samuel finished, there was a long moment of silence. Finally Lowell spoke, his tone softened. "Mr. Evans, I must admit, when the family first suggested this expanded role for you, I had my doubts. I wondered if you had the ambition for it." He paused, a hint of admiration in his eyes. A faint smile played on the corners of Lowell's mouth. "I see now that I underestimated you, Mr. Evans. Your ambition isn't about personal gain, it's about the greater good. That's refreshing." Samuel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "So do you think the family will agree to my terms?" he asked. Lowell nodded. "I do. In fact, I believe they'll be impressed by your foresight and commitment to your principles. It's precisely those qualities that make you the right person for this role." With that, Lowell left, promising to draft a new agreement that incorporated Samuel's conditions. As he watched Lowell go, Samuel felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He was stepping into a larger world, one filled with both great potential and significant challenges. Over the next few months, Samuel poured his heart into expanding the community center model. He traveled to towns and cities across the state, meeting with local leaders and community members, listening to their needs and tailoring each new center to serve its unique community. Every center brought fresh challenges that required careful planning and collaboration. Throughout it all, Samuel remained firmly grounded in his values. He made a point of spending time in each community, getting to know the people and understanding their needs firsthand. Samuel insisted on transparency in all operations, regularly publishing reports on how funds were allocated and the impact each center was making. The work was exhausting but deeply fulfilling. He watched as communities transformed, much like Oak Ridge had. Children who once faced uncertain futures were now thriving in after-school programs, adults who struggled with unemployment were gaining new skills, and families who had been on the brink of breaking apart were finding the support they needed to stay together. But as the network of centers grew, so did the challenges. Samuel soon found himself navigating complex political landscapes, dealing with resistant local governments, and fending off individuals who saw the centers as an opportunity for profit. One particularly difficult situation arose in a small city where a corrupt mayor viewed the new center as a threat to his control. The mayor launched a smear campaign, spreading false rumors about the center's intentions and even questioning Samuel's character. During this crisis, Samuel realized the extent of the power he now held. With a few phone calls, he could have used the Halstead's influence to remove the mayor from office. But Samuel knew that using such power would betray everything he stood for. Instead, he chose a different path. He went to the city not with a team of lawyers or PR experts, but with an open heart and a willingness to listen. Samuel met with community members, addressed their concerns honestly, and invited the mayor to see the center's work firsthand. The process wasn't easy, and at times he doubted whether his approach would succeed. But gradually, his efforts began to shift public opinion. Confronted with the center's positive impact, the mayor eventually softened his stance, and in time, even became one of its supporters. This experience reinforced Samuel's belief in the power of transparency, empathy, and genuine service to the community. Samuel's belief in grassroots change had only grown stronger. It wasn't about wielding influence from above, but about working alongside people, empowering them to create the changes they wanted to see in their communities. As months turned to years, he watched with awe as his network of community centers expanded and thrived. Each center was unique, shaped by the needs and character of its community, yet united in a common purpose: to uplift, empower, and bring people together. Through it all, Samuel remained true to himself. He still lived in his modest home in Oak Ridge, chatting with neighbors and volunteering at local events. The black SUV still followed him, a subtle reminder of the powerful forces he now moved among, but it no longer felt like a shadow looming over him. Instead, it had become just one of many tools at his disposal for doing good. One crisp autumn day, 5 years after Samuel had first stopped to help Emily Halstead on that lonely road, he stood outside the Oak Ridge Community Center. A crowd had gathered for the unveiling of a new wing, dedicated to providing healthcare services for underserved members of the community. As Samuel prepared to give his speech, he spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Aunt Rose, her eyes gleaming with pride, his friends David and Lisa, who had become crucial to the center's operations, and standing near the back, Emily Halstead, with a warm smile on her face. Taking a deep breath, Samuel stepped up to the podium. Looking out over the sea of faces, people whose lives had been touched by their collective efforts, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. 5 years ago, he began, his voice strong and clear, I made a choice to accept an unexpected opportunity and to use it in a way that would benefit not just myself, but all of us. He paused, scanning the crowd with heartfelt appreciation. But the truth is, it wasn't just my choice, it was all of ours. Every person who volunteered, every child who came here to learn, every family who found support in their darkest hours. You all chose to be part of this. You chose to believe that we could make a difference, that we could build something meaningful together. Samuel's voice grew more emotional as he continued. Over these years, I've traveled to many places and watched communities transform in ways I never thought possible. And what I've learned is this: the power to change the world doesn't come from money or influence. It comes from people. People who care, who work hard, who refuse to give up, even when things seem impossible. He gestured to the new wing behind him, adding, this building, and all the others like it across the country, aren't monuments to any one person or family. They're monuments to the human spirit, to our capacity for kindness and compassion. They're proof that when we come together, when we choose to see the best in each other, and to work toward a common goal, there's nothing we can't accomplish. The crowd erupted in applause, a powerful surge of appreciation for the impact they had all made together. Samuel stepped back, overwhelmed with gratitude, as he realized how far they had come, not just as individuals, but as a united community. As Samuel finished his speech, the crowd erupted into applause. Stepping back from the podium, he felt a whirlwind of emotions, pride in what they had all achieved, humility from the community's unwavering support, and a renewed drive to keep pushing forward. Later, as people mingled and explored the new wing, Samuel found a quiet moment with Emily. They stood off to the side, watching the lively scene unfold. You know, Emily said softly, wonder evident in her voice, when we met that night, I never could have imagined any of this. Samuel chuckled, nodding. Neither could I. Life has a surprising way of unfolding, doesn't it? It does, Emily agreed, a warm smile crossing her face. In that moment, Samuel understood that real change comes from individuals who genuinely care about their communities. The influence he had gained was just a tool to enhance the kindness and compassion that had always driven him. Though his life had changed profoundly, at his core, he was still the same man, committed to lifting others up and staying true to the values that had brought him this far. Thank you for joining me on this journey of kindness, choices, and transformation. If you found meaning in this story, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support truly means the world.